Pour yourself a cold one.
Let's strike 'em, huh?
And listen to Ross Tucker break down the top college prospects on another tasty edition of the College Draft.
Yeah, it is Daddy Soda time here on the College Draft podcast presented by DraftKings. Unbelievable deals they've got, by the way, this week for the NCAA tournament. Make sure you check out both the DraftKings Sportsbook and the regular DraftKings app. It's a good week to get on those two apps and check it out for college hoops. We primarily talk college football here on the College Draft podcast. And in particular, we're talking about prospects. And today starts our 2 weeks in a row talking about the big boys, the O-linemen, the guys that really make the difference between winning and losing. I love it. Please, by the way, I think most of you know I'm a former offensive lineman myself at Ross Tucker NFL, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. You can follow all the stuff we do on social media at Ross Tucker Pod. Means a great deal when you guys engage in any way. It's awesome. Absolutely awesome. Any way, shape, or form that you engage with the show, the retweet, the like, all that stuff. The star of this show, though, it's Emory Hunt. He is the man. By the way, I did have some Daddy Sodas on Saturday, some Floyds. My buddy got me some Floyds. They were delicious. But check out Emory at FBall Game Plan on Twitter, Football Game Plan on YouTube, which is a huge YouTube channel. And then if you don't have it already, I don't know what you've been waiting for, but footballgameplan.com/2021 draft guide. Phenomenal. Phenomenal. Don't wait until 2 weeks before the draft. Get it now so you can take your time in reading through all of the different profiles. I've told you guys before, there is no other draft guide like it, just from the sense of how many different people Emory does evals on. Emory has background on. It's really pretty awesome. Emory, how are you?
I'm doing fine, Ross. It's a great morning to talk some football. I'm glad we get to talk your position now, the most important positions on the field.
Yeah, I mean, look, quarterback's still the most important position, but O-line, I mean, you even look at like free agency, and we'll see what happens over the next couple of days, but I think Corey Linsley, the former Packers center, who's a free agent, Joe Thuney, I think a lot of these guys are going to be getting paid. Trent Williams, O-line matters. O-line is important. Should be joined momentarily by Brandon Thorn, who is an O-line expert. He'll join us for the next couple weeks. Really looking forward to that. But I do want to start with this, Emory. First of all, what's the latest in FCS? I saw you on Twitter at FBall Game Plan posted your latest FCS poll, some of the notes on it.
Listen, the first 3 weeks of the spring, 4 weeks of the spring, and Nichols has been doing a great job. The offense has been outstanding. Lindsey Scott has been phenomenal at quarterback. So I pushed them into my top 5. They were playing so well. They scored 86 against Lincoln in Missouri, a 70 burger against Lamar. Man, but they got thumped this week by Sam Houston State, 71-17. Sam Houston went out there and opened a whole can of Bearcat on them. The speed that Sam Houston has, they have 2 NFL prospects for 2022. The quarterback was outstanding. He runs a 4.3. My goodness, they just ran all up in Nichols last week, and it was fun to watch. And then Jackson State, you got to love what Deion is doing with the Tigers in that program. They just are now going, they went from expecting to win to now, or they went from hoping to win to now expecting to win. And it looked like a whole different program out there on the field. They beat the brakes off Mississippi Valley State.
Love it. Absolutely love it, Emory. So here's the deal. There are really, I would almost say, 3 different types of offensive line prospects now. There are the guys that are the pure tackles, Emory. There are the guys that are more or less the interior guys. They're pretty clearly a center or guard. They're not a tackle. They're a center or a guard. And then there's the guys that played tackle in college and might be able to do it in the NFL, but might also be really good guards in the NFL, like a Zach Martin or Joel Bitonio, Brandon Sheriff's another one. I mean, some of these guys that were really good college tackles, they slide in to play guard, and they made a lot of money. It was a good move for them.
Yeah, and it's one of those talking points that we see on what people call draft Twitter, where people get frustrated when you move guys to positions. But like you said, some guys, although they played tackle in college, they thrived there. The projection is like, hey, man, maybe we can take this guy's ability and push him inside. And a lot of it, I think personally, you probably could speak more to this than anybody. A lot of it has to do with arm length and how they are in space as far as out there on a perimeter. So some guys may not have the prototypical height or arm length, so they project better at guard. And so that's why you see some people get talked about playing both. You just can't move anybody to any position because it requires a unique skill set. But that's why we see the discussion ongoing about, is this guy a tackle or this guy a guard? If you're good, listen, I just want you on a team. We'll figure it out later, right?
So let's start with your tackles, Emory. And I think it's interesting because, you don't have chalk rankings. One of the cool things about footballgameplan.com/2021 draft guide, you don't just go with the chalk like everybody else does. You've got your number one ranked tackle, Christian Darrisaw from Virginia Tech.
Yeah, and what made me just so impressed with this game was that this dude has a counter for every counter. So anything a defensive lineman throws at him from a pass rushing perspective, he has an answer for, and he plays well with his hands. Our O-line coach in college used to call that playing the piano. So he's able to, work guys off and pass guys off. He's patient. He's athletic. So he has everything that you want at that position. I think Trent Williams is a comp that I have for him because of how well he does in pass pro, how athletic he is on a move, and how dominant he can be out there on the field. So to me, just watching him, and it was a lot of consistency with what I was seeing from a positive perspective.
Interesting. I called Emory the first game he ever started. There was some issue with Virginia Tech, and he started in the season opener as a true freshman for Virginia Tech against Florida State, and he did okay, and Virginia Tech won. Now, Brian Burns got him a couple times, but Brian Burns is a first-round pick,
right? And
he's had a really good NFL career so far, and Darrisaw had to start as a true freshman left tackle, but he did some positive things that night. I like the guy you have ranked second just by watching him. I really enjoyed watching Liam Eichenberg from Notre Dame.
Yeah, and then for me, it's very close, man. This is a really good offensive tackle class, in my opinion. And Eichenberg, like you said, he's so technically sound. He's consistent on both ends of offense. He dominated. You watch Notre Dame, just like how you watched BYU, and it makes complete sense why both of these quarterbacks had phenomenal years, because their offensive line was NFL worthy. I'm talking about from left to right, Notre Dame was dominant up front. Same with BYU, but Eichenberg, I thought, he started the season, everybody was talking about him. Then his talk kind of died off. But when I dove back into the film to watch, for the draft, I'm like, man, this dude is consistent. And that's how I grade. If you're like, everyone can point to a game and say, oh, he does. Look at this game, check this game out. But if I'm picking games at random for offensive linemen, because there are no stats, so you just kind of pick games at random, every game I watch, I should be able to see the same thing, and that's what I saw with Eichenberg. It's just complete, consistent excellence on the left side.
I saw a stat, Emory, where it's like 139 of the last 141 games Notre Dame has played, their left tackle was a first-round pick. Wow. Think about that. And I think, I don't know if that's before Eichenberg or if Eichenberg ends up going in the first round, if that continues. But it's pretty incredible. As promised, let's bring on my buddy Brandon Thorn at Brandon Thorn NFL. Does a terrific job. So much to like about Brandon. You got to check him out on Twitter because he got some really cool stuff that you can access, whether it's free agent grades, college grades. Brandon is a Army veteran. Brandon, is that right?
Air Force
veteran. Yeah. So always make sure to thank him for his service. We'll start with this, Brandon. Thank you for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. Emory's top 2 offensive tackles, Christian Darrisaw from Virginia Tech and Liam Eichenberg from Notre Dame. Anything that jumps out to you about either one of those guys?
Man, I mean, interesting guys. I like Darrisaw a lot. I mean, I think his talent is undeniable. I think he's one of the most talented guys in the draft. The only thing that concerns me about him is I feel like he runs a little hot and cold in how he plays. I think the Liberty tape was kind of concerning in that regard. UNC to a lesser degree, or not UNC, Duke to a lesser degree. But, I mean, he kind of reminds me of Deion Dawkins a little bit. I mean, just his frame, his build. I think he has plenty of power and play strength. His athletic ability is impressive. I like the zone scheme that they ran at Virginia Tech and how well he executed in that scheme as well. And plus, I think he has the skill set to play in more gap type concepts. So I don't think he's scheme dependent. So he has a lot going for him. He played hurt his freshman year, I believe. He played as a true freshman after attending Fork Union. I think he had a foot injury in his second game of the year. He played the whole year hurt and then had surgery that offseason. So, I think that speaks to his ability to play hurt, toughness. So that was impressive. So I like Darrisaw. He wasn't, that high for me, but I could definitely see him being maybe the best tackle in the draft if some of those concerns get quelled early on. And Eichenberg is a guy I actually like a lot. Not top 2 is not as much as Emory, but I do like him quite a bit. He reminds me a lot of Riley Reif. I think he's a guy who could come in right away and be solid and probably be that way the rest of his career. I think he's very, very polished, fundamentally and technically sound, as a lot of Notre Dame guys are. But, I really like what he does in pass protection. I think he's very efficient. And, I was a fan of him as well. So, I'm slotted. I have those guys slotted a little differently, but they're both top 5 type tackles for me. And I like both.
Emory, this is interesting. You've got your number 3 guy. I haven't seen this guy ranked this high anywhere. It's clear. You mentioned earlier you love BYU, Emory. You love the BYU. I'll never forget watching BYU against Navy. I've never seen that in a college football game. That was unbelievable. But you've got Brady Christiansen as your 3rd-ranked tackle, Emory.
Yeah, because here's the thing. We spent a lot of the season talking about Zach Wilson passing and all that good stuff and, Algier running the football really well. And, when you go back and study Zach Wilson, you're like, man, he has 6 weeks back there to throw. It's like you're watching the tackles, you're watching the guards. You're like, oh, my goodness. They look like Notre Dame just in white helmets, right? And so Christensen, I thought, was outstanding. And the fact that he's able to play out on the move, he's able to attack the second level with ease. Sometimes you see linemen get out there on the second level and they see the target, but they're not able to consistently connect. So they kind of miss the target or they whiff completely. But he was consistent. He was able to block well on the move. He has good, hand usage, all that good stuff like that. And in a run game, he's able to dig guys up out of there and just vacate space. So it's like, you go from a C gap to like an F gap. He's able to move guys all across the line. He's outstanding. So him and we'll talk, next week about the guard, but BYU's offensive line was right up there with Notre Dame, in my opinion.
So it's interesting, Brandon, because the next 2 guys on Emory's list seem to be 1 and 2 on everybody else's list. He's got Rashawn Slater from Northwestern at 4 and Penei Sewell from Oregon at 5. I'm really interested in this, Emory, because people have been acting for over a year like Penei Sewell's the greatest thing that ever happened to the world. For you to have him ranked at 5 certainly jumps out to me. Can you explain why?
Well, I think, and we see this a lot in draft conversation. Once one name gets thrown out there early, everybody tends to hang on that name, and that they ride that initial evaluation throughout. It's like when, let's say, when Matt Barkley was, the prospect that said, "Oh, he's gonna be a first round pick," and so everybody started to see him in that lens, and he kind of carried that name until his last season, where it was like, you know what, maybe he's not that good of a prospect. And so for Sewell, I feel like he was the first offensive lineman that everybody threw out there, and just kind of, hung on that. But when I watched him, I just thought, like, yeah, he's strong, he's physical. I didn't like his footwork. I felt like he had issues there. And, sometimes he wasn't as much of a finisher as you would expect a guy like that to be. And so for me, there were other linemen, obviously, that I thought that at that position that were better than him. I know some people talked about him being a guard or a tackle. Maybe that's a way for him. But, as far as me grading him straight as a tackle, I just felt like he's good. But maybe there are guys that do things from an athleticism standpoint better than him, so they rate a little bit higher.
Brandon, what are your thoughts on Penei? So I've read up a lot on what other people have said. It feels like people are really enamored with the natural ability, but you do see from everyone that perhaps he hasn't always put it together, or that there are some consistency issues, whether it's with his feet or hands.
Yeah, so I'm very high on him. I'll just say that, and I could tell you why. But I think the concerns with him are the fact that he's so young, and it's kind of a double-edged sword. There's a positive to that, obviously, because there's a lot of room for growth. But then also he's not, the most refined player in terms of technique and things like that either. But I would say he's still good from what I saw and how I interpreted his tape. But man, I mean, for me, he's what was really special to me was I got to talk to his offensive line coach a bit, and he had me watch certain games, certain plays. And there was one tape in particular, it was 2018 against Stanford, and he was 17 years old in this game. And the stuff that he was doing on that tape was just remarkable for his age, especially, and his ability to make quick decisions on the field, and basically interpret what a defense is doing very quickly post snap and make the right decisions. And I just feel like his football intelligence was evident on tape, and that's kind of a part of his game that I think is getting a little bit underrated and overlooked because he's 6'6", 325, and he's moving the way he does. But I think he's a very savvy football player on top of that. Now, I think he's going to ideally want to go to a situation and need to go to a situation possibly where it's a veteran offensive line room where he could get some mentorship and kind of guidance early on because he's so young and he is relatively inexperienced. So I think that's probably one caveat to his evaluation that I think is important to mention. But I mean, I was very impressed with his tape. I think he's very explosive, and I think in pass protection he has the range you want to see on an island to get to his spot against wide nine rushers. I actually liked his hands quite a bit. I think his play strength was really good. I think the Auburn game was impressive to me against Marlon Davidson off the edge, 290-pound edge player. I thought the way he was opening him up on those wide zone kick-out plays was impressive. Not to mention, him in space is pretty special. So I don't know. I saw a guy for, his situation, his age and stuff like that. I saw some pretty good refinement there, although compared to other guys, maybe not quite on that level. So there's, I could see how people aren't maybe quite as high on him. I think Bradley Penei was a tape against Utah where he had a little bit of trouble. But man, I'm still very high on him. And the fact that he's going to be 20 years old week one, I think there's a lot to work with there. And from what I understand about him, his football intelligence, that's what really secured the evaluation for me. Because I think the size, athletic ability, his power and things like that are pretty evident. But when you have that other element to your game where you're savvy at that age, I think that bodes well for his future. So I'm pretty high on Penei Sewell.
Let's get to Rashawn Slater. And I guess the question there, Emory, is do you see him more as a guard or a tackle? Because I've heard both.
I see him more as a tackle. For me, if you're dominant in one area, I kind of want you to stay there. Team's going to move you where they want to move you. And so for me, as just a evaluator, I tend to not project, where a guy can go, because that obviously you can't control that. So if he goes to this scheme, maybe someone sees him as a tackle. If he goes over here, maybe someone sees him as a guard. So just for me, in my own sanity, let me just grade him as this, and then wherever he goes, you put him where you want him to go. Because the traits are just the traits, right? The scheme is something completely different. So I do see him as a tackle, although you can understand he can play anywhere across the front because he's athletic, he's good, he's he plays with that mindset that you want your offensive lineman to play with. I think it's funny when you watch guys at Northwestern. I think people, right, wrong, or indifferent, they look at those guys as not physically tough, right? Just from that's Northwestern. That's a smart school. We can, we should be able to dominate those guys. But then you get out there and now you get into a physical discussion with their O-line. Patty Fish is out there busting things up. The corners are out there jamming you at the line of scrimmage, and you can't stop their run game. So that's what I like about Northwestern, how they go out there, they take the fight to your doorstep. And I do like that about Slater.
I never remember where I see certain things. Brandon, was it you that published that tweeted the video of Slater squatting and like the strength coach hit him and he turned around and looked like he wanted to kill the guy?
Yeah, well, Duke posted it, Duke Manyweather, but I commented on it and shared it. And I thought it was hilarious how the second time he turned around, how he was almost going to like strike that dude. That was just hilarious.
Yeah, he was serious there. What do you see from him, and what do you think he is, Brandon?
I mean, I like Slater a lot. Maybe not is quite. He's not my number one or number two. Actually, I have another guy in there, but I think number three, he's right there. And I mean, for me, the thing that stood out the most to him was his body control, contact balance, and footwork. I thought were outstanding. He's able to mirror guys up the arc and inside pretty well. And I think he's able to recover from compromising positions very well. And I think that's a huge trait to have as an offensive lineman in the NFL, because you're going to be put in compromising positions no matter who you are. So your ability to stay latched, sustain, and recover is important. So that was the thing that kept popping up for me on tape in the pass and the run game. So I think he processes things very quickly. He was, I think it was against Michigan, the tape I watched, where they were running a lot of twists and stunts to his side. And this was in 2018 at right tackle. And he was just handling all that so well. So I watched him at right and left. So he has the positional versatility that's on tape, but also I think he could play guard at a high level because his hands are so good. I think when the game speeds up inside, that wouldn't be a problem for him. And then, of course, it's great to see him, own his pro day the way he did. That just shows that he's a pro, and he's been preparing the way that he should. One thing that I did see a little bit of issue with is I think I'm not a big, if your arm length doesn't match 34 inches or whatever, you can't play tackle. There's plenty of tackles who play at 33 and change. And I think that's what he is at, or 33 even. But the Iowa tape in 2019 against AJ Epinesa, who has 34 and a half inch arms, and he's pretty good with his hands. He had a little bit of trouble in that game, letting him into his chest and control him a little bit. That's only going to get exacerbated, as a pro. And I think that was maybe, and it's funny because Chase Young, he obviously played very well against him. But, I think he faced him 6 or 7 reps one-on-one in pass protection that game. So it wasn't like a full game, of going against him, individually either. But still, nonetheless, great tape. But the Epinesa tape was a little concerning. I thought that popped up some issues that could give him some concerns. And then Zach Bond gave him a little trouble from Wisconsin as well in 2019. So, I think he's a really good player. I think he's a relatively safe player with a very high floor. But I don't see an elite starter eventually, maybe very good. So I think he has a little bit of a cap ceiling, but I mean, that doesn't, mean that he can't be a really good player for a long time either. So I like him a lot, but I think he's my third tackle right now.
Who's the other guy, first or second? I mean, obviously Sewell's 1 or 2. Who's the other guy?
I'm a huge fan of Tevin Jenkins. So,
okay.
Yeah, I love Tevin Jenkins' tape. Man, Oklahoma State, I watched him 2019 and 2020, so I saw him at left a little bit, at right a little bit. I thought he really improved from 2019 to 2020, which was impressive to see. I think the thing that jumps out about him, he's listed at 6'7", 320, but I think he has good feet, and his power I would qualify as rare. His ability to, once he gets latched into a guy, pass or run game, I mean, the rep is pretty much over. And I think that translates really well. Not that he'll be able to be that dominant as a pro, but I think, that'll, bode well for him being able to establish leverage on guys and sustain it. So I mean, that just kept popping up to me. I mean, the Texas tape everybody's talking about on Twitter, against Joseph Asai, dominated him for the most part. But I think all the tapes I watched were just kind of reminiscent of that one. So I'm a huge fan of him. I think he could probably play guard as well. I think, another interesting thing about his evaluation is in 2020, he was the only returning starting offensive lineman on the team. So I think that was, kind of a interesting tidbit there. He's playing with a lot of inexperience and had to move around based on injury and stuff like that. But yeah, he kind of reminded me of Jedrick Wills a little bit. So I don't know. I'm a huge fan of him, and I think he's going to be good right away.
The one last guy I wanted to make sure to ask you about, Brandon, and Emory doesn't have him ranked that high either. But I've seen on Twitter, Brandon, that you don't understand why so many people have Jalen Mayfield from Michigan ranked so high. Emory has him as his out of 5 tackle guards, he got him 5th. And I've seen you sort of surprised at people that have Mayfield as high as they do in the first round.
Yeah. So, when I watched him, I think the positives, I'll start there. He doesn't turn 21 until May. So he's young. He's very inexperienced as well. So again, it's kind of the double-edged sword. He has 15 career starts. So it's like, I think he needs some time before he's an immediate starter. But as continuing on some of the strengths, I think he has solid athletic ability for his size. He shows the burst and movement skills in space to locate smaller targets. You see him pulling around the edge a couple times and leading in the run game. At his size, I thought that was impressive. And he flashes overwhelming power at the point of attack in the run game on down blocks and angle blocks. He has a nice gallop technique on double teams. So I think in the run game, he could do some things for you. But in pass protection, I saw a guy with really just a messy footwork. Not really, I didn't really see the range to get to his set point against wide 9 rushers and even just any kind of speed rush, especially guys who can counter inside. I think the Notre Dame tape was problematic, to say the least. He got, I think, he struggled mightily in that game against a couple NFL guys. And then the Wisconsin tape as well was, rough. And I think that he turns his hips so quickly to rushers, and that creates that soft, high inside shoulder. He just gets blown up inside. He can't, get there and protect his corner as well as you'd want. So I've seen some guys project him inside because of, I think, some of these reasons, which makes sense to me. But yeah, I just saw a guy who needs time. I think the size, the competitive toughness is really good. I love the way he finishes his blocks, some athletic ability and power. That kind of stuff is there as a foundation. But I think technically and hands and footwork, he's a pretty good ways off right now.
Here's what everybody needs to do. They need to check out Brandon on Twitter at Brandon Thorn NFL. He's going to join us next week as well when we talk centers and guards. You already know you need to follow Emory at FBall Game Plan on Twitter, Football Game Plan on YouTube, footballgameplan.com/2021 draft guide. Love the O-line talk, love the difference of opinion, love the breakdowns, and love that we get to do it again next week, talking centers and guards. Go to DraftKings for your March Madness NCAA tournament stuff. You guys know what to do. DraftKings app, DraftKings Sportsbook app. Just make sure you use the code Ross. Other than that, the keg is kicked. We are all tapped out.
Thanks for listening to the College Draft Podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Fantasy Feast, Even Money, and The Business of Sports. All available at Apple Podcasts, rosstucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.